What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We have got a great guest. I didn't come up with a catchy title for the episode name, though. But we've got Leah with us here today, Leah Midgarden, and she is a leader both in the union sphere, in her in her professional life, and in the Democratic National Party now, and the DFL, which is the local Minnesota party, in her volunteer life. And so, Leah, thank you for being here. I'll let you title yourself, because there's so many letters and words involved with that.
Well, it's an alphabet soup. Well, thanks, guys. So, yeah, my name's Leah, and I am finishing up my term as treasurer for the Minnesota DFL. That term will end at the end of March. Back in May, I was elected to a 4-year term on the Democratic National Committee. And then in my paying position, I'm president of the Southeast Minnesota Area Labor Council of the AFL-CIO. And for those who may not know, because I'll tell you, we've got a lot of union members who don't, AFL-CIO are the acronyms for two organizations that merged: the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And in that work, we support people's right to organize and try and build solidarity within the worker movement, fighting for things like wages, benefits, safe working conditions, economic and racial justice, solidarity. And that work looks like getting labor-endorsed candidates elected, and ideally we would love to have union members run for public office for every position, really literally from dog catcher up to president of the United States. So if there's any union members out there who are interested in getting involved on your school boards, on your county boards, city councils, county commissions, state legislatures, reach out. We want to help.
Awesome. I see you just have an affinity for organizations that have merged with other organizations, because the DFL and the AFL-CIO. So you just like the merger.
Yeah. And for those who may also not be aware, the DFL is actually an acronym for a merger of two political parties: the Democratic Party of Minnesota and the Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota. They merged about 80 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I think it was. It's definitely been a while, and it is, I think, some of the underrated and undersold kind of rich history of the Minnesota Democratic Party, and why we still need to be special, and the only Democratic Party in the country that's not, an official Democratic Party, but the DFL. I guess I don't know if there's anything you want to expand on that and the history of the DFL. We'd love to have somebody who's been involved just give us a little bit of rundown about the kind of the important heritage of that, because I've been meaning to do content on that and have not gotten to it, but I would love to hear it from you.
Sure. Well, there's a few really good documentaries. Afterward, I'll try find those documentaries for you. Every so often, the Ramsey County Historical Society will air it at a library, and really encourage folks to do that. And I think it's important, as sort of table setting, to understand that the union of those two parties, the merger of those two parties, happened at a time of really interesting, interesting political change and political realignment in this country. So, by way of context, I grew up in North Dakota, where the Democratic Party there is called the Democratic Nonpartisan League, which, ironic, yes, I get it, right? The Nonpartisan League actually got its start running candidates in Republican primaries in North Dakota to take over the Republican Party. So this is at a time of a lot of what's referred to as prairie populism, which gave rise, of course, to the Farmer Labor Party. Largely, we're talking about workers, and for example, at the same time in Wisconsin, where I lived for about 10 years in the city of Milwaukee. The city of Milwaukee elected a socialist, an actual socialist, as their mayor. So so this is happening in a time frame when there's a lot of populism becoming really the dominant strain of politics in the Midwest. Um, and it's farmers and workers getting together to stand against the corporatists and the monopolists, and demanding power back for themselves, economic justice for themselves. So it's a really interesting time frame. In my home state of North Dakota, eventually, as the parties start to realign, the Nonpartisan League then merged with the Democratic Party in North Dakota. Here in Minnesota, the Farmer Labor Party, as they saw the Democratic Party shifting towards more progressive values, decided to merge with the Democratic Party of Minnesota. So it's a really fascinating time period of a moment when there was a lot of solidarity, class solidarity in this country. And I gotta tell you, hope we can get back there someday.
I mean, we're all on the same page there. We've been preaching this for a really long time, and again, it's one of those points of pride. I don't think that the DFL quite embodies what it did, obviously 60, 70 years ago, kind of in its infancy and that class solidarity. But I do think that that's why Minnesota held so strong as such a progressive state. Arguably one of the most progressive states, if you just look at our voting history, I'd say, is because of that class solidarity and that party merger. And before, I feel like our farmers kind of lost their way here in recent times, and just rural Minnesota in general has kind of lost its way on who has stood up for them and looked out for them. But we were one of the last states to do that, kind of in that transition of rural America to the Republican Party, which is, it's something to be proud of, something to be sad that we are too sort of falling behind on that now. But I take great pride in our state for everything that it has done for a very long time, and I appreciate the history lesson on that there. I guess moving into this, it has been, on that note, a very painful few months, capping off, a somewhat painful few years prior to the Biden administration, and we've got a long, painful road ahead. How are you feeling with your involvement in the Democratic Party, and both state level and now national level? With where we are and where things are going, what's kind of your perspective on your personal feelings on that?
Mm-hmm. Deeply scared shitless. I'm sorry, are we allowed to swear on this show?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, it's terrifying. Look, in 2016, I was certainly, along with many others, calling 45 out for the type of person that we thought that he would be.
Mm-hmm.
I think what was less expected was the extent to which the guardrails, and this is going to sound odd, but even the guardrails within the Republican Party that kept him in check in his first term. He hadn't packed the Supreme Court. And he had for lack of a better word, the Republican grown-ups around him. Paul Ryan of Wisconsin was Speaker of the House. He had, actual.
Time out. I just want to point out that it is painful that in 2025 we are now saying that Paul Ryan is a grown-up of the Republican Party, because back in the day, like, I looked at Paul Ryan like what the fuck with his glamour shots working out and shit like that, and like, this is such a joke, and like the distance we've come down this line of idiocracy and insanity, that now Paul Ryan is, a grown-up of the Republican Party, and he absolutely is by today's standards. It's just, sorry, right. I had to point that out. It is a painful realization to me that this is where we're at, where we're looking at Paul Ryan somewhat fondly.
Right. It's ridiculous. And yet this is the reality we're in. And I think what's more terrifying this second go round is that his first term was basically an experiment, and a lot of those guardrails are no longer around. He's got a super majority on the Supreme Court. He controls Congress, and he is, as we're watching the circus that are some of these Senate confirmation hearings for his cabinet positions, just these absolute unqualified people who are now going to be the and this is terrifying, right? The thought leaders of our country.
I don't know if that's the proper terminology for these people. I think that has been one of my biggest concerns with people. Life goes on, and we've got good presidents, bad presidents, and like the obstacles and the brakes on the train that we had in 2016 and with all of these other previous presidents are gone, like completely gone. There is, the only checks on this right now are incompetence, like the Republican Party's incompetence and Donald Trump's incompetence and ego, like his fact that he needs to be loved, and he gets very irritated very quickly with the people around him, and like that's a saving grace for us, right? Because, which is sad, like we're hoping for incompetence, because incompetence is better than them competently doing fascist shit, and this is a very different country. Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, I just came to me I feel like we're sort of like seeing, like, and I'm not trying to make this super crazy comparison, but like we're sitting here hoping that Kim Jong-un can't create a nuclear missile because he's so incompetent, not because he doesn't have the resources to do so, but we're hoping that Donald Trump doesn't do the just democracy breaking level things that he said he's going to do, mostly because he's just incapable of actually completing the task of doing that.
Yeah, it's painfully scary when we are rooting for just the system to not work well enough for them to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish, because their stated goals are scary. It's not even like this is behind the scenes, nefarious stuff that they're doing. It is out in the open. We want to upend democracy. We don't believe that people should have the ability to choose the destiny of their country and the direction of their country, and we want to turn this into a full-blown oligarchy or kleptocracy or whatever ocracy that is not democracy that you want to call it at this point. And it's scary too, because it's like, at a certain point, I was like, I'm just hoping that the McDonald's catches up with Donald Trump just any day now. And now I'm like, fuck, I hope he makes it the next 4 years, because like JD Vance is fucking terrifying. Any of these people who don't have the ego of Donald Trump but still the same anti-democratic goals are going to be more dangerous at this point, and that is scary to me. On that note, too, I kind of wanted to talk about union leadership and the way that the unions went through this election. You being obviously professionally in the union sphere. What the fuck? What are your feelings on that?
Yeah.
Obviously, a couple of them, the Teamsters and the Firefighters Union, did not endorse any candidate. Specifically, did not endorse Kamala. Sean O'Brien seems like he's less for the unions than most right-to-work people at this point lately. And he was like, we were singing his praises a little while ago, and now I'm just a little confused on where the about face has gone there, and what your perspectives are on just the direction of unions in this country, especially the Teamsters being the biggest union in the country, and they're just, in my opinion, a failure, a breakdown of what a union is supposed to be doing in the political sphere.
Right. So let me just state off at the outset. A lot of unions do get involved in election work, and to follow up on that, we subsequently get involved in legislative work. And that's part of what we do as unions and within the labor movement. But the broader mission of the labor movement and our affiliates, which is the individual unions, is about fighting for their members. And just a little bit of inside baseball, union elections are just as political as any other organization's elections. So, yeah, I mean, it was painful in terms of the election results. According to our national organization, this was the biggest mobilization effort that labor has done in quite recent memory. But I think it's also important to understand some of the rules under which labor is permitted to engage in the political process. So, for example, we are not permitted broadly to participate in direct voter contact with the general public. We are only permitted to speak with union members, and only if their internationals have given permission for us to reach out to their members. And subsequently, then we are only permitted to talk to those union members about candidates that have been specifically endorsed by those respective unions. So if those unions didn't endorse, for example, the Teamsters, right, we were not permitted to call, text, email, or door knock any member of the Teamsters as a national election program. Now, what Sean O'Brien did, however, is that he permitted some of he allowed his intermediary Teamster organizations to make their separate endorsements, but the national Teamsters would refuse to endorse. So here in Minnesota, the Joint Teamsters Council did endorse Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. But when we're missing that component of being able to try and run a national program, and then we can't execute that nationwide, really frustrating. And I'm trying to remember the stats, but I think 57, based on our numbers, 57% of union members did not vote for our endorsed candidates. And that has been a disturbing and growing trend for the past 50 years. This despite the fact that we are also looking at a generational high in terms of public support for the right to organize, the right to form a union. People want to support unions, People are clearly wanting to actually follow through and form a union or join a union. And so it's a real frustration to see that gap.
Do you think it's just like the last 50 to 60 years of propaganda from the Conservative Party that has sort of like allowed people to just create this level of cognitive dissonance where they're working together as a Labor Party and collectivizing, but then voting for somebody in a party that is like their main ethos is individual, like individual economic freedom, which are
Sure.
counterintuitive to each other, dichotomous, whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, yes, right. There's broadly been an attack on the working class from our opponents broadly over the past 50 years. But I would be remiss to say that there is also been there's also been labor leaders who have really taken their foot off the gas. And probably the number one concern that I hear when I'm talking to the presidents of my locals is that it is really hard for them to get a lot of their membership to show up at their monthly membership meetings. Just like in elections, decisions are made by those who show up. And when, you know, if you've got a local with, 75 people and only 5 people are showing up at your monthly meetings, it's really hard then as a union and as a labor movement to educate your own members about what the benefit is to being in a union, how it helps your life. One of the things that I was talking with some electricians about was really struggling to get young people to sign up for their apprenticeship program. And they had this table set up with all of these beautifully printed information sheets about pensions and health care benefits and retirement. And I half jokingly said, look, if you want these kids to sign up for your apprenticeship, you show up in a $100,000 truck and say, hey, kid, you want to buy this truck? Sign here, right? Because a lot, and I was certainly guilty of it when I was a newly minted worker in my 20s. The idea of planning ahead for retirement and a pension, I didn't care. I wanted to know what was on the check every week. That was my priority. And as a much younger, healthier person, I didn't care about health insurance. Why would I need health insurance? I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm not sick. Why am I paying all this money for all this stuff that I don't need, right? I think one way that we get people in the door is to really make the argument that if you want to have a job with good wages and, more importantly, a grievance process, so you can't just get fired because your boss is pissed off at you. And that comes with a level of job security, of knowing there are very specific terms before you can get rid of me. There are very specific terms about what I'm going to get paid and how much I'm going to get paid, and what part of that goes into my how much of that goes into my pension, how much of that goes to healthcare, and knowing that as a union member, as part of a union, you're going to have more influence over what those numbers actually look like, because you've got a union who is negotiating that contract for you.
Well, and I think that that's a good point on the front side. This is how much more you make being in a union, because people look at the union dues coming out of their paycheck, and people really love looking at oh, I'm this money's being taken from me. They hate that about their taxes. They hate that about their union dues. But like when you're like, all right, you look at a union and a non-union company's pay scale side by side, and the differences are 20, 30, 40%. It's nowhere close to what those union dues are going to be. And it's like, you look at that union dues, like you're paying a few $100 a month or however much it ends up being your dues for 2, 3, 4 times as much monthly on your paycheck. That's a huge return on your investment. And yeah, buying that $100,000 truck because that's what people out of high school are kind of worried about is, what's the cool shit I can buy now that I'm an adult? And I think that that's a great point. And I think that one of the things that is it boggles my mind that people don't get that is when you work for a non-union company in construction and you do union scale jobs, you make so much more money. Like everybody, the company makes more money, the workers make more money, everybody makes more money in a non-union company working a union scale job because that's what's required by the state or whatever organization is hiring for that. And it's like, you could do this all the time. Like that could be your scale 100% of the time. Like this is not like the fringe benefit you get because your company managed to bid a non-union or a union scale job as a non-union company this one time. And I don't understand why that level of advertising to draw in new membership has not been pushed harder.
Yeah. Well, and right, but to sort of touch back on my earlier point about the concerted attacks against working people, right? And to some extent, I think liberals and progressives have to own part of this, right? Is this the quite frankly the negative stereotypes about people who work for a living, right? That if you're smart and successful, you're going to go to a 4-year liberal arts college and you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer. And if you're dumb, you're going to be a plumber. And I got to tell you, I was out at a training facility, and I guess I had never thought about it, but they're using calculus. That's a math skill that I am not good at, and I consider myself to be a reasonably intelligent person. But math ain't it. And so this idea that. Right, but this idea, right, that people who work with their hands and maybe get a little bit dirty are somehow working these jobs because they're not good enough, and I'm going to use that in air quotes, because they're not good enough to get into a 4-year college. I think that that's also part of that stereotype that we're still having to push back on. I would argue on one side, it's the attack on working people, but also, again, this problem with certain quote-unquote progressives who want to also fall into that trap of demonizing working people.
See, I guess I would push back in that, I don't necessarily know of like a ton of progressives that are like saying that like these are dumb people who don't get college degrees. I think this narrative came through probably the boomer generation in saying that all like, I don't know actually what your age or what your generation, if you're Gen X or not, but I know every single person in my generation probably was told you have to go to college because it's the best thing for you to do. And financially wise, that's even still true today. Lifetime earnings differences between high school diplomas and bachelor's degree is about $1 million over your lifetime. Just looking at the median numbers. So like I agree that there's certainly like a trend or like a thought of like if you can't make it to college, then you're like a worse person, or you're just not you're just dumb, right? And I don't necessarily know where that came from, but I do know that the root of it is that if you go to college, you will make more money. And even with inflated costs, I don't know if it makes as much sense in today's world, but certainly 40 years ago, it was absolutely the case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Taylor, I would argue that is, again, part of this class warfare.
Sure.
Folks like my grandparents who who were formed by the Great Depression, went off to war during World War II, right? They were people for whom college, and my grandfather, for example, dropped out of school after the 8th grade and went to go work at the creamery because they had no money. A lot of young men of his age cohort, a lot of them joined the military because it was 3 meals and a hot cot, or 3 hots and a cot, because their mom and dad they literally couldn't feed them, right?
No.
And so, but again, this class idea, especially right when you're coming out of the Gilded Age, and these oligarchs who are sending all their kids to the Ivy Leagues, and their kids are becoming, and I should qualify, their sons are becoming the bankers and the lawyers and the industrial magnates, right? And so, yeah, I would say that this is, again, part of a larger class warfare narrative. And the GI Bill was a major government program that really opened up the possibility for folks like my grandfather and his generation to imagine a life for themselves, more importantly, imagine a life for their kids that wasn't even something that they could even imagine before World War II.
Right. It's almost like government-funded education jump-started the modern American powerhouse, economic powerhouse that it is today. Universal education. That's always an option. We could certainly try it.
Well, and there's a lot of things that we've already done, right? Universal health care. I was really surprised to find out that during World War II, the United States government had free universal child care across the country, because the young men were gone, the women were going into the factories, and in the meantime, we literally shipped half of our workforce out to war. And we're looking at trying to gear up for a military industrial economy, and we have no workers, and the available workforce is like, look, love to come and work for you, but I got 3 kids at home, I can't leave them. And the response from the federal government was like, okay, well, what if we just paid for free daycare? And they did. They did it.
There was a time when the federal government just solved problems. They're like, this is a thing that we want to do, and this is the obstacles to do that, and they just this is how we get over those obstacles. And there was no questions asked. And it is insane how we get so hung up on the little things today. But this class and culture warfare, I think, is a really good segue into one of the things that I wanted to talk to you the most about, which is a lot of us self-identifying progressives or people on the left, liberals, whatever the fuck you want to call anybody, left of Mitch McConnell would be, is we've been incredibly frustrated with the Democratic Party as a whole, with this campaign, and one of those things is just their failure, the Kamala's campaign and the Democratic Party as a whole, not just in 2024, but for 30, 40 years probably, with a little blip under the Obama campaign that sort of failed to really deliver, is a connection to the middle class. they have not, the idea of the liberal elite sits very well. That's why 57% of union members don't vote with a union endorsed candidate, right? Because even though their policies might be better, that connection has not connected. And it's not just that. I mean, obviously, with younger generations, we were talking about this a little offline ahead of time, and we can talk about that a little bit more now. But Gen Z specifically had a really big issue with the genocide that's happening in Gaza and our continued support of Israeli colonialism in the region, and our continued weapons funding of them, where they are doing things that the global community as a whole has objectively just stood back and said, this isn't cool anymore. This has gone too far.
Mm-hmm.
And the Democratic Party as a whole, as a platform, couldn't even pay basic lip service to that. It's it always started out with Israel has the right to defend itself. And then it's yeah, and maybe they shouldn't be killing so many women and children and young people. But, they've got the right to defend themselves, and that's what's important, and Hamas, blah, blah, blah. We had that... Democrats failed to address the economy. They're Kamala went on about an opportunity economy, and I'm still not sure exactly what that was supposed to mean, but they failed to address the fact that, well, yes, economic numbers are doing great, and we can see that statistically. A lot of people are still suffering on a middle class or lower income level. It's yeah, I see you say all these numbers are doing great, but we are not reaping those benefits, and you are not acknowledging that on our level. They didn't put I'm sorry. We had no dissent from the Democratic Party as far as fighting against Trump being elected. There was, even at the certification process, somebody who just stood up and said, this is a ridiculous thing that's happening, and, well, this is the process, and we can't change it. I'm going to voice my dissent in this process, because obviously 4 years ago, they voiced their dissent by overrunning the entire Capitol, and we couldn't even muster, anything more than a handshake that wouldn't be returned to Kamala in those situations. The list goes on. AOC, then even after the election, didn't get put on the Oversight Committee. They punted the Overton window on immigration, which is one of my biggest frustrations with the Democratic Party, and just not differentiating themselves from Republicans. And I'm curious as to you being an insider, and me obviously being very frustrated and voicing that very vocally lately. Go ahead, give me your perspective on this, because I'm ready to take a torch for the whole thing.
Right. Listen, you're not wrong, and I think that the best way to describe that whole the phenomenon you're describing is that you're describing a Democratic Party that is reactionary, a party that doesn't have a plan and a long-term vision, and we see the results, right? If all we are doing as a party is just responding to the most outrageous things, whether it's events overseas or blowhards in our country saying and doing stupid shit, right? It's not enough to complain about the problem or admire the problem. People want solutions, right? I'm certainly seeing a lot of discourse here in Minnesota over the frustration. A lot of people across the spectrum, right, expressing their frustration with the situation that's happening in our own state legislature here in Minnesota, right? Because at the end of the day, people want politicians to actually do work, and I understand as a voter that it's a lot of this posturing, a lot of this issuing press releases, sending surrogates out to the Sunday morning talk shows. Okay, great, but what are you actually doing to fix the problem? And I think unfortunately, and not without justification, this is the only thing people are seeing Democrats do is complain and admire the problem and then not present solutions. Now, the counterpoint to that is that I think as Democrats, we've also done a very poor job communicating to people the real wins that we have done for them. I was on January 1st, Governor Walz, I think I would have to go back and look at the timestamp, but I'm pretty sure he, like at 12:01 after midnight on January 1st, he sends out a tweet, right, I guess, I'm not sure if he's still on Twitter or what, but he posts that starting January 1st, copays for prescription drugs for chronic conditions are now going to be capped at $25 a month. And we did that prior to the 2024 election. By matter of just a test, I went out and talked to some folks who are more politically engaged and people who are less politically engaged, just sort of my own informal poll. Not a single one of them knew.
Yeah,
Not a single one of them knew.
The only reason I knew about that was because of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And
that is an incredibly fair point. Even watching Kamala on the campaign trail and just the lack of selling the wins that the Biden administration, which she was a part of, and the right kept trying to tie her to, was painful to watch. Like, why are we not selling all of these huge legislative wins? Because Biden was a very legislatively successful president. Like, the Biden administration was very legislatively successful, and there was a lot of wins to sell the campaign on. And if the Republican Party tried to be like, well, you've been in office 4 years, why haven't you done anything? It's like, because the vice president doesn't do much of anything. But if you want to tie me to this, these are my wins then too. And she could have done that, and we didn't see, I don't think, enough of that. I didn't get enough of that. Like, obviously being more in tune with legislative action just because of creating content on the topics, I felt like I was better educated than most and still didn't ever feel, I felt like I always had to go dig up that information on my own. It wasn't something that was just sold to me by the Democratic Party, which it should have been, because Republicans will take credit for shit that they've never done, they voted against, and like, yeah, but you see, we did this. I mean, Pete Stauber, who you're familiar with, takes credit for fucking everything he voted against here. So, I do think that you're absolutely right. The Democrats have completely failed to sell their victories, and then they're very reactionary to their shortcomings, and they're very reactionary to just the shortcomings of society in general, the economy in general, and it's so easy to see from the outside, like just minor improvements that can make huge differences that they don't make. And why is that? Do you have any insight? Obviously, being part of the institution, as it were, as to why it's so impossible to make these changes.
Yeah, a lot of it is cultural. To be really frank with you, right? We. First of all, I mean, the short answer is Democrats are cats. And there's also that adage, right, that Republicans fall in line and Democrats fall in love. And it's, and look, whether we're talking about Minnesota, which is a very big state, or the country, which is massive, there are competing interests within the party, and some of that is personality driven. Some of it is we just have selfish assholes in our party too. Let's not fool ourselves and suggest that our party is just this amalgamation of the saints, because it ain't. So when you're trying to, as a party, run an organization where we've got, for example, we've got whether it's party units here in Minnesota or state parties around the country wanting to know why it is the DFL doesn't give them more money, or why the DNC doesn't give the various states enough money, right? Because they all have, we're all geniuses in our own minds, and we all know how to win elections. And if they would just give us the money so we could do what we want, right? And, you know, we've got this really, and I've described it as a Gordian knot right now as we're gearing up for the DNC elections. We've got this we've got one strain of argument that says that we are, as a party, are too beholden to the donor class. And then we have another strain of the party that says, you guys have forgotten us and you're not investing in us, and you don't care about people that live in Oklahoma. You don't care about the people that live in Pipestone. And we get ignored. And that's why we keep losing. And so the Gordian knot that we're trying to wrestle with is, okay, you want more money, you want more resources. That means we got to go to donors, and that's a tough needle to thread.
I don't know that that's true, because the donors aren't providing the money and the resources for, like, I live in rural Minnesota, and it's not, the donors aren't providing the money to build our roads and infrastructure out here. That's tax dollars. The donors provide the money to get people elected or to run their campaigns. It's not even to get them elected. Clearly, Kamala raised, a record over $1 billion and is not going to be in the White House in January. So it's not even that they win these elections. It's that you need that as a campaign, as a candidate, to compete in theory. And we've allowed the money to permeate our elections in that way. Obviously, Citizens United, and this has trickled down to fucking school board races now, is being infiltrated by national politics and national money. But that doesn't translate to anything better happening here in rural places. And I definitely see it. Like, I feel it. I live it, and I understand that the Democratic Party and policies still fare better for me and my neighbors out here. But also, when they say that the Democrats are liberal elites who don't give a fuck about the rocks and cows, not to give not to give Walz a hard time because that was a joke taken out of context, but the reality of it is that they don't. They are ignored. We are ignored out here. They spend a ton of time campaigning in what they think are the pockets of importance, and that has lost them huge tracts of voter bases. And I think the Hillary campaign kind of highlighted that more than ever. Like, Hillary didn't even bother showing up to Minnesota at all, right? She showed up to Wisconsin once. She's like, we've got this blue wall that's unbreakable, and then the whole wall except for Minnesota. And Minnesota was that close, And I really think that highlights just the downfall of Democrats translating their policies and actions to how it affects people where, like, I live. And that is frustrating, because it's if you do enough research, you can see it, but you cannot expect people to make their lives politics unless you do something like what you do or we do, and I think that's where part of that disconnect comes from, is that, like, when you're that invested in it and you understand, it's like, how does everybody not see that this is obviously there's one better than the other, and they're both not doing a great job for us, but one is clearly better than the other. But when you just are worrying day to day about how you're going to make a living to feed your family, put food on the table, keep a roof over your head, you don't really give a fuck. And the people who are telling you what you want to hear, the people who are paying attention to you, are the people that you are going to vote for and respond to the most. And Democrats have not done that. on a rural scale, on an outlier scale whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. I'm just,
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, and so there's part of the conversations that I'm hearing about, and not just about the DNC officer election, but broadly speaking, is about we need more investment in party infrastructure. We've got multiple candidates running for DNC chair who are making a pledge, a really expensive pledge, for year-round organizing everywhere in the country. That's salaries, man.
Yeah.
That's benefits. That's renting office space, and that's and the point of that is that we would have these organizers placed to not just organize people, but to do things like train our local volunteers about here are the talking points, and here's how you personalize it to your neighbors and localize the issues, so that way people can really see themselves, right? And I think that's the magic, right, of populism and part of Trump's magic. And I don't know if the governor watches your podcast or listens to it.
I would love to.
He would.
I got to meet him one time. I'd love to have some more face time with him, but that
but I would argue that Tim, yeah, but I would argue Tim has much the same magic, similar to Trump, which is that you can be in this giant room with Tim Walz, and you're going to leave that event feeling like he was talking to you for 20 minutes.
100%.
And just you, right? And Trump does the same thing. And honest to God, guys, half of the battle that we are up against is people, and this is probably the thing we hear over and over and over again as a critique of our candidates and our party. You don't listen, you don't understand. Which is a way of saying you don't see me. And if look, we're all social beings, we are relational. I've got a friend in the party who likes to say if they know you, they like you and they trust you, they will vote for you. But knowing and liking and trusting somebody assumes that there's some kind of relationship, even if it's a perceived imaginary relationship in somebody's head. Right? I mean, how often have we heard from Trump voters? He gets me. Right? And these people are,
but like,
right? And these people have never met him. They saw a sound clip on Fox News, and they're like, oh, he gets me, which is their way of saying I feel seen. And because I feel seen and I think this person gets me, now I feel like I've got a relationship with this person. And it's a relationship that makes me feel good. It's a relationship that triggers endorphins. And I'm going to go into that ballot box and I'm going to fill in the circle. Or, I'm going to pull that lever. And honestly, right, this is something we, as a nation, should have seen coming during the Nixon-Kennedy debates, right? The majority of people during that debate didn't actually have television. So most of the Americans that listened to that debate had to listen to that debate on the radio. And well over 60% of the people polled post-debate said Richard Nixon won that debate. But of the people that viewed that debate on television, they said John Kennedy won that debate. Right? Because it's again, we're social beings. The easiest way for us to connect as groups and as people and in relationship is first and foremost visually. And honest to God, half the battle just getting people to like you. I mean, Let's go back to 2016, right? How many times do people say, yeah, Hillary's got a likability problem?
And it was true. And I think brings me to a point where you were saying earlier that they're the people running for DNC leadership right now are campaigning on very expensive promises for year-round campaigning, year-round party building, and that's salaries and benefits and da 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 da. And I think that this is once again the Democratic Party looking at this in a sphere of a doesn't exist anymore. Because the Republican Party has figured this out, right? Like they do this. They have year-round campaigning. They have year-round infrastructure set up with pipelines of people to continue pushing their message and their agenda and their ideologies. And the Democratic Party has failed to support that. And obviously, I'm super biased on this because I've been doing this shit for free now for like 3 years, pushing Democratic Party ideologies and or just progressive ideologies that mostly align with the Democratic Party at this point. And like we have a podcast that we pay for out of our own pocket and stuff like this. And the Democratic Party has not fulfilled that social contract of like, we need to pay attention to you when it's not campaigning time. We need to identify your problems. And that just comes in the form of providing resources to those types of communications. And I mean, it's been said over and over again that the Democratic Party lost the internet. And it's not for lack of trying, it was just for lack of spending money in the wrong place this election and being way behind the curve, spending money at the wrong time. Like, this is stuff that needed to be built up for a very long time. And I don't know, do you see that coming? I know there's been a lot of talk about it, but do you see them actually following through on this, just giving support to content creators and podcasters and media outlets that can continue to combat the just absolute asinine shit that conservative media puts out all the time, so we don't have to be reactionary, so we can meet the narrative where it's at, and we can start writing our own narratives and pitching our own wins in an effective manner.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the very serious questions that a lot, not just the party, but a lot of our affiliated organizations, like labor, are asking ourselves, right, is the historic model of direct voter contact does that actually work anymore? Does texting and phone banking and door knocking, does that actually move the needle? Because we expend a lot of resources doing that work. And I think there's very much and I'm cautiously optimistic about this, a growing sense that the future of connecting with people is about mass media, controlling the narrative. Another one of the legitimate critiques about Democrats and about the party is that we allow the Republicans to define us, and then we respond, right? And so I think you're right. There's just last night. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this group called Chorus, but they're basically a bunch of social media influencers who held their own DNC candidate forum, and it's up on YouTube, so you can go check that out, right? But it's about understanding, right? Especially as our society orders itself today is very different. Even from compared to 2008, right, when Obama, I would argue, was the first president to successfully harness the power of social media. um, and mass media. And 2008, that seems like 2008 was a lifetime ago, right? I hope we can agree. 2008 was a lifetime ago, right? And so, I would like to know, how many people under the age of, say, 40 have broadcast television?
I don't.
I'm guessing I'm just guessing. It's probably a significantly lower number than when the boomers were the same age, right?
Oh, it's 1,000 significantly lower.
Right? And so where people get their news, how people get their news, it's a completely different social structure. And for the Democratic Party to engage in those same tactics, I gotta tell you, and I'll give this as an example. In 2018, we had a congressional candidate here in Minnesota who wanted to run ads in the Twin Cities media market. Won 2018. One 30-second spot in the Twin Cities media market was $250,000.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
and
insane.
How many people are actually who's watching broadcast media?
Yeah, old people. I mean, so I'm looking at a stat right here, right now that says ages 18 to 29, 61% consume their media via online streaming services. There's just no comparison. You get into, even, which is surprising to me, the 30 to 49% still 52, or 30 to 49 years old, 52% still consume, cable or satellite subscription. But the younger, and this is as of 2017. So our demographics, absolutely, which is the largest demographics in the country right now, is millennial, tail end Gen Xers, early Gen Z, or late Gen Z, early Gen Z. Overwhelmingly 61% as of 2017 consuming all of their media via online streaming services versus 31% to cable or satellite subscriptions.
Yeah.
So we're dropping the ball there, have been dropping the ball there, I think, for a long time.
Yeah. And and I like I said, this is the Gordian knot that I'm trying to wrestle with as I'm trying to wade through these candidates, and we're going to be voting here at the end of the month. We're going down to DC for that meeting, but it's one of many questions that I want to ask all of them. Is look, we've got, again, with justifiable concern, we've got a part of our party who is very concerned about our relationship to big money donors, and you guys are also proposing really expensive programs. So how do we talk to our base who says you guys are too beholden to the donors? How do we talk to the voters and the constituents, right, who have who have decided that the Republicans are the party of the working class and the Democrats the party of white-collar elites, right? Even though we've got one party with legislative record that proves otherwise, and another party where literally he created a government position for Elon Musk, and somehow we're the party of the billionaires?
Yeah,
It makes sense.
I think that distinction is easier because very few people pay attention to internal party politics, right? And so as long as the candidates running for actual office are not receiving direct donations from the George Soroses that Biden just gave a Medal of Freedom to for whatever. Again, just feeding the fire of like the shit. Like Republicans have made George Soros the boogeyman for decades, and then Biden on the way out, like, yeah, Presidential Medal of Freedom to you for it. And it's just, you know,
I'm sure that George Soros has actually done good things for the world. Not, you know, I don't know specifically what they are, but I think he probably. I mean, he's still a multi-millionaire who is, you know, billionaire. Yeah, you know, donating a small. Yeah, there's no ethical billionaire, so exactly.
Right.
But yeah, so like, it's just bad optics, regardless of the situation. It's like he's donated a bunch of money to us. We give him a Presidential Medal of Freedom. That seems very Trumpy to me, you know, and that's bad optics. But if you separate, like, what's going on in the party politics, if the party's going out and fundraising from mega donors to provide money and resources to content creators and podcasts and stuff like that, as long as they don't get caught having, like, literally Russia funding, content creators that are peddling your shit, I think that nobody's ever, going to put that together or care. It's the people who are actually in office that people are getting really frustrated with. Like, why are we getting millions and millions of dollars in donations from all of these major corporate interests and foreign lobbies like AIPAC and stuff like that? Like, why is that money funneling in, and why are these people making decisions for the people that we are personally electing? But on a party level, I think that is worrying about something that nobody gives a fuck about. Like, it's just, who cares where the money in the party itself is coming from, as long as the candidates running are not beholden to those donors.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think one of the things that's a really important distinction to make is the very, and I will admit, the very razor thin line between being beholden to your donors and being accountable to your donors, and trying to educate and get people to understand: are we on the accountability side with our donors, or are we in fact on the beholden side to the donors?
That's tough because obviously corporations are donating and spending on, 50 to 60 times more than individual Americans are every big election cycle. So it's tough. I mean, it feels like beholden. You just look at the numbers and there's no way the average American can expect their 1/50th or 1/64th amount of political donations to make any effect when you could talk to 10 people and get, half of that. So and we've talked about this a ton, that we think that elections should be publicly funded, and there should not be any super PACs. Obviously, Citizens United should be overturned, and your donation max should be a couple $100, no matter how much money you have.
So, if I could take a moment of personal privilege and put in a plug for a really fantastic program we have in Minnesota called the Political Contribution Refund Program, where you can give to your candidate who is running for office in Minnesota, or to any of the major political parties, up to $75, and the state of Minnesota will reimburse you. They'll give you that money back. And the reason why I really love that idea is because my $75, look, that is chump change compared to what groups like Organized Labor are giving. It's certainly not what folks like George Soros or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos is giving. But here's where I would really try and encourage people to embrace your own power to the and to recognize your power. One, there's more of us than them. Yeah, the oligarchs are super rich. There's a lot more of us, right? And all of us chipping in whatever we can, and to be able to chip in at literally the cost of a stamp, because you do have to send in the form to the Minnesota Department of Revenue, but for the cost of a stamp, right? To be able to have one small impact, and big fan of public media. So if this sounds a bit like a pledge drive, I apologize. But yeah, there is a way for folks in Minnesota who don't have the deep pockets where you can write a $10,000 check. You can write a smaller check and get your friends and neighbors involved, and you can do this for very little cost, because there's a lot more of us who have to work for a living than there are the rich folks who can just, oh yeah, here's $10,000.
Yep. And I did that for Eric Olson. It's definitely a great program here. You know, he was my local, running for my local representative. Unfortunately, didn't win, but we're fighting uphill battle in my district. And I think that is a great transition into the last thing, because we're kind of running out of time here. We have run out of time, but we don't ever pay attention to that anyway. Talking about local Minnesota legislation, the state legislature specifically, and I know this was the topic you wanted to touch on, and I just want you to fill in with people what's going on and the insane shit show that our Republican Party is currently pulling, I suppose, in the state of Minnesota, and how we are dealing with that as that goes on.
So I would say, in a nutshell, it's really important when you're writing up any kind of legal document that you are very clear about your definitions, right? So for those who may not be aware, we've got a situation specifically in the Minnesota House where the body that was elected in the November election was equally divided between Republicans, Democrats, 67 members each, and leadership from both sides had entered into power sharing negotiations in terms of who would hold which positions and how the rules would look, and then through unforced error on let me qualify that. An unforced error from one of our candidates, and a really unfortunate, not cool mistake by an elections office, we found ourselves in a situation where for roughly 2 weeks, the Republican Party was going to have a 1-seat majority for about 2 weeks. And so they decided, we're going to be in the majority for 2 weeks, so we're going to take all of the leadership positions. We're going to control all of the committee assignment. We're going to chair all the committees. We're going to control the speaker, who is the Speaker of the Minnesota House, which, by the way, these chairs and the Speaker are 2-year terms. So it was going to be for 2 whole years, for the 2 weeks that they would technically have the majority. So part of this drama is because no one seems to agree on on how the rules define the word quorum. Is it so? For example, in our party constitutions, we very specifically say quorum is 20% of the delegates registered. So here's how many people registered for your event. 20% is what you need to maintain quorum so you can conduct business.
Yep.
Apparently, that kind of language isn't in the House rules or I don't know if it's the Minnesota Constitution. I think it's the Minnesota Constitution. Apparently, nobody thought to, right?
So quorum right now is 100%. Is it not? Like, is that not the accepted?
So Secretary Simon has issued a ruling that, in the opinion of the Minnesota Secretary of State's office, quorum for the purposes of the Minnesota House is 50% plus one, which would be 68 members. But again, because quorum is not more specifically defined, the Republicans are arguing because they have technically, as of today, a one-seat majority, that so long as all of their members show up, that is sufficient to meet the quorum requirements and enabling them to, in their minds, justify electing the person who will be Speaker of the House for 2 years and the people who will chair committees for the next 2 years. And all of this when we are going to, as of January 29th, be right back to 67-67 party split.
Yeah, this is a bonkers situation. I mean, I kind of agree with the Secretary of State here that like 50% plus one of the total body, right? Not just like, oh, we have a 1-seat majority. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like that feels arbitrary. A bit of an argument. And then aren't they also arguing that the special election on the 29th is happening too quickly and should be extended?
Yeah, so the special election for anyone who might be listening who lives in Minnesota House District 40B is actually on January 28th, but we will know the results by the 29th. Well, hopefully, knock on wood, we'll know the
Right.
results by the 29th.
Isn't that
right?
mostly like Roseville-ish area? Yeah.
Yep. So the crux of the GOP argument is that Curtis Johnson, the person who was elected in November to that seat and then disqualified by a court, that technically, according to their legal argument, that in order for a special election to be called in the instance of a vacancy, that Curtis Johnson would have had to first be sworn in as a duly elected member of the legislature and then resign, thus creating the vacancy. Because up until Tuesday, technically, that seat was still represented by the outgoing representative, Jamie Becker Finn, and so that technically the seat was not vacant, meaning that the governor could, in their argument, that the governor didn't have the legal authority to call for the special election when he did. They're not arguing that the governor didn't have the right to call the special election, but that he couldn't. Their argument is that he could not legally have called for that special election prior to yesterday.
And the frustrating thing here is that all of this is technicalities on something. Like they're grasping for any straw they can on what is a very safe DFL district. Like there's never going to be a Republican that wins this district, so they know that this is going to be refilled no matter when they hold the special election or how they go about this. This is going to be refilled with a Democrat in that seat. So they are trying to push this off so they can do this really unethical power grab in these 2 weeks before there's another majority, or however long they can try to kick the can down the road. And it's so disingenuous. It's frustrating. It'd have been one thing if it was a very closely contested race and they had some argument of the possibility of winning the seat and putting one of their own in there. in that sort of situation. But it's beyond me. I mean, it's not beyond me. It's the same unethical shit they do all the time. But it's
Well, and I think and you're right. And I also think it's a lot more concerning that the Republican caucus made and is still threatening to not recognize the election certificate for Brad Tapke, who was duly elected. Now, yes, it is not cool that 20 ballots were lost in that election. Not cool at all. Not helpful. And also, apparently, the Republicans don't understand statistics. In order for their candidate to have actually had a recount go sufficiently in his way to defeat Brad Tapke, their candidate would have had to have won all 20 of those ballots.
And we've had people who have under oath and in affidavit said that they voted for him. The people whose candidate or ballots were lost, correct? Like said that that. So like we know that he didn't win all of them right now. Yes.
Again, the odds of you flipping a coin and getting heads 20 times in a row, not zero, but it's also highly unlikely. Right.
But now we don't even need to do that because again we've had these voters come out and say that like under oath or under affidavit that they voted not for the Republican, so therefore all we needed was one, and we've had multiple. I guess I don't remember how many exactly, but
Brad Tapke officially won that race by 14 votes. There were 20 ballots that were lost. And of those, at least 6 of that 20 said that they had voted for Mr. Tapke. It was a razor-thin margin, and whether or not it should have been that close in the first place is a whole other thing that we're not going to get into. But he was duly elected. And I think this is an aspect that's getting lost in a lot of the circus here, is that the Republicans are threatening to not allow a duly elected member of the legislature do their job. And that is, that is a disenfranchisement of the voters. Even the voters that didn't vote for Representative Tapke.
To not have a representative period is
So that is when we talk about the Republican power play, right? That's the one that I need people to understand, is that we have a situation where the Republican Party of Minnesota is trying to deny a duly elected official from doing their job.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing us up to date on that. I think, as always, we've gone over our time by quite a bit. Was there anything else, Taylor, that you had before we wrap this one up?
Nope. We covered a lot of things, so I think we should give our viewers ears a break this week and keep it under an hour and a half.
Right. Well, listen, I had fun. I hope that we gave folks some things to think about. And if I'm really lucky, people are going to walk away from this feeling a little more informed.
I hope so as well. I really appreciate once again you reaching out and volunteering to come on and do this and let us give you what I thought was going to be a little bit more of a grilling than I think it was. And it is nice to see some people this close to the system still acknowledging, I think, where we all feel we are and where we need to go. So we really appreciate that. Are there any big projects, big things you want people to hear about right now to make sure that they know about, are informed about, are ready to go do? Please go ahead. Do all your shameless self-promotion.
Sure. All right. If you live in Minnesota Senate District 60, or Minnesota House District 40B, there's a special election on January 28th. And please, please, please go out and vote. I believe early voting has already started, even though the primary for that Senate seat just ended yesterday. They had to turn around real fast and get some ballots printed up for early voting. It's important. Again, decisions are made by those who show up. We live in changing and dynamic times, and we need to have elected leaders within our party, elected leaders within our legislative governing bodies that represent the reality of where we live now. And for my fellow party activists who are listening, we know we got a lot of work that we got to do. We're gonna disagree a lot on what the solutions are and the path forward, but this is existential. And if you'll indulge just a brief personal story, I am a naturalized citizen to this country. And for those who are just listening and who may not be able to see the visual, I'm not a white man. I don't get to hide. And I've got, and many people who look like me, many people who don't look like me, but who identify as other marginalized and or historically excluded communities. This is a scary time for us. And so we need you to get involved, whether that's making a donation, whether that's volunteering with a campaign or a political party, and do what you can. If all you can do is, I shouldn't use the word only. If what you can do is write a postcard or send an angrily worded email, do that. If you're able to go out and demonstrate in the streets, do that. Anything that you are able to do within your abilities and capacities is valuable, because we are not, while we may disagree on the path forward, I want to believe that one thing we can all agree on is that we are not giving up this democracy without a fight.
Absolutely.
And speaking of demonstrating, we are planning on going to the Women's March on Saturday. So if anybody listening is planning on going, we might see you there over in St. Paul.
This will probably be after this episode airs, I'm assuming. So
yeah, that's a good point. Hey, for all our 25 live viewers,
we appreciate you guys.
Oh, we appreciate you guys for listening.
Mm-hmm. We will be there. Saturday to. It's the People's March now, not the Women's March.
Oh,
and,
sorry, my bad.
Just showing up, hopefully, for democracy and doing the little things that hopefully make some bit of difference in this world. So thank you again so much, Leah, for all you do. You dedicate more of your time and your life to the perpetuation of hopefully a better world and a better America than most of us. And it doesn't go unnoticed by those of us who know you. So we appreciate the hell out of that and the work you put in. We just appreciate you being here. We appreciate all of our listeners, both in the live and in the recorded sessions, for showing up and listening. That's why we do this. We wouldn't do it if you weren't here paying attention to the shit we ramble on about for a half hour longer than we promised we would this time. That's what's most important. Obviously, we still live in this capitalist hellscape, so if you support us financially, whether that's subscriptions, whether that's sending us a little bit of something, whether that's buying merch at OffJawaggon.com for both podcast and my personal stuff, we appreciate that as well, and that's what helps us keep the lights on and the cameras rolling. But we appreciate the hell out of all of you. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next week.